Blockchain. Sounds complicated. You've heard it a few times today, I know. My argument and Kate's argument today, the argument that we're going to make, is that actually, if you strip back the jargon, get rid of all these buzzwords, actually blockchain is a deceptively simple technology that has a great number of uses across societies, many interstices. And charity is definitely one of those places where blockchain can really make a tangible difference. And that's what we're going to talk about today. This is part of a project that we're running called Nothing to Lose But Your Chains. Delicious pun there. Getting ready for the blockchain revolution. This talk is part of that. And what this is about getting the people that we care about, charity leaders, charity workers, change makers of all stripes, to understand what blockchain could do for them, to understand their role in the blockchain revolution. This is not about technological utopianism or intellectual whataboutery. This is about how blockchain can help you as a change maker in your daily life right now, and what you need to be doing right now to get ready for the imminent future, which is in turns exciting, but also there are some challenges, I'm not going to lie. There are some real questions about how blockchain will affect our daily lived reality, and that's something that we're going to tackle in the course of this talk, in the course of the project, and this talk will be a little bit of a sneak preview into that. Here's what you're going to hear over the next few minutes. First of all, Kate is going to give you the lowdown on what this blockchain thing is anyway, in a bit of detail, a few little bits of examples here and there. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you, as I say, a sneak preview of this project that we're working on with Charity Futures, some examples of what's going on in the blockchain world, some really interesting, cool use cases, some key questions that are emerging, and some challenges as well, some debates to keep that grey matter fizzing as you get on your train and go back home. I'm going to stop there. Kate.
Okay, so my name's Kate and I work for an organisation called Humanity X. What we do is look at emerging technologies and how they can be used in the peace, justice, humanitarian and development sectors. Blockchain has been my life for the past 6 months because everyone wants to know what it is, what it can do, and whether or not it's going to make them redundant. So I was going to begin this by stating, many of you probably haven't heard of blockchain, but it's come up twice already today. So my point was going to be, you probably haven't heard of blockchain, but you probably have heard of Bitcoin. Bitcoin is the infamous cryptocurrency most commonly associated with buying drugs on the internet. But I promise you it's becoming much more mainstream. For example, this photo was taken by me in Leather Lane. It was on a food street market, and I actually bought a can of Coca-Cola with my phone using Bitcoin. The reason I want to talk about Bitcoin is because it's got a bit of a mixed relationship, or a mixed terminology when it comes to Bitcoin and blockchain. Blockchain is the underlying technology. Bitcoin is simply one use case of it. Blockchain can do far more than just cryptocurrency, and Ash and I are going to talk about some of those uses. So what is blockchain? You read any article on the internet and you're going to get a bunch of jargon. It's going to say something like blockchains are peer-to-peer, immutable, transparent, decentralized, distributed digital ledger. In plain English, it's basically saying blockchain is an online record book, which everyone and anyone can access, no one can change or alter, and doesn't require any intermediaries or third parties. So to break that down a bit, it records transactions. They are peer-to-peer. If I want to transfer Ash £50 or 1 Bitcoin, which would be really generous because Bitcoins are worth like almost £5,000, I can transfer that to Ash directly. I do not have to go via a bank. I do not have to go via TransferWise or PayPal. It's directly between Ash and I. So that means I'm going to save on fees and commissions from the third party. It also means I don't have to wait 3 to 5 days for my transfer to go through. As I mentioned, blockchain is a ledger. It's basically an online record book, or it could just be a database, essentially. So what makes it different to all other databases? Well, the ledger is distributed. It is not stored in one place. It can be stored in multiple computers all around the world. This means that the ledger cannot be corrupted, it cannot be subject to system failure, and it cannot be hacked. Now, all the entries that go into blockchain are transparent and immutable. They're immutable, meaning they can't be changed, because there are copies all over the world. You change one copy, it'll get rejected by all the other ones all over the world. Whatever is put in this ledger is the digital truth. It's transparent because people all over the world can access this. Now, it's not transparent and it's not going to reveal the intimate details of the transaction. It's not going to say, Kate transferred Ash $50. It'll have my digital identity, which is just numbers and letters, transferred X, which will be encrypted, to, and then it'll have Ash's digital identity as well. So blockchain can have uses in pretty much every sector. This is the 2017 Global Blockchain Benchmarking Study, which shows which sectors are most interested and also most concerned by blockchain technology. Unsurprisingly, the most interested sector is banking and finance. Firstly, because it's introduced cryptocurrencies, which is a competing currency for them. But second of all, because they fear they might be made redundant because of blockchain being peer-to-peer. So rather than sticking their head in the sand about it, they've decided to face it front on and find ways that they can work with blockchain technology. Interestingly, the sector that's second most interested in blockchain is government and public goods. Estonia, for example, their e-government system runs largely on blockchain technology. Finland disperses benefits to refugees through blockchain technology. And even the DWP in the UK pays some of its welfare payments through blockchain technology up in Manchester. So there are many commercial benefits for using blockchain, but there are also lots of social good and humanitarian purposes that blockchain can have application for. So cryptocurrencies. This is a non-exhaustive list, by the way. This is just something that I've put together, but the use cases are coming up all the time. So cryptocurrencies are not just for drugs. They're also not just for cans of Coke in a street market. They can also be used in countries like South Sudan where the local currency is not stable. So I'm currently talking to World Vision, who are looking at exactly that solution. It also allows transfer of value for people without bank accounts. But it's not just cryptocurrency that can be transferred through blockchain. Normal legal tender can be as well. So that could be used for remittances, which would get rid of the 8 to 20% fee that currently exists in remittances. It could also be used for humanitarian and development disbursements, which Ash will cover in his presentation. One of the strongest use cases for blockchain is actually supply chain. IBM, Maersk, Walmart are all using blockchain technology to trace certain products. So Walmart are using it to trace pork in China, for example. This could have ethical uses as well. For example, your smartphone may contain cobalt and tungsten that come from conflict mines. You wouldn't know because there's currently no way to trace those conflict mines from the mine all the way to your smartphone. Blockchain could offer a solution for this. Blockchain has also been discussed in great detail for identity management. 1.7 billion people in the world do not have an identity. When we find a way to give them an identity, it should be stored in the blockchain because passports, driver's license, these are all currently stored in siloed databases, and it's impractical, it's easy to lose, subject to corruption, system failure, etc. Blockchain can be used simply as a glorified database. It could be used for registration records, beneficiary registration. I recently did a workshop with Oxfam to consider whether or not blockchain could be used for beneficiary registration. To be perfectly honest, we concluded no, not yet. We're not quite there yet. But it is a potential opportunity. Then there are some more fanciful things, like some people are saying blockchain can be used to counter climate change and save the rainforest, etc. But that's all in the future. So blockchain is still in its infancy. There is still issues of maturity and scalability, but there's enormous potential. And these are just some of them. And Ash is now going to talk to you specifically about some of the potential in the charity sector.
So, that was a really, really helpful rundown of the kind of the gamut, the spectrum of uses for blockchain within the humanitarian space. The project that we're doing, it drills down into sort of three areas that I think blockchain could really make a difference to the daily lived reality of change makers within our space. And those three areas are finances and funding, service delivery and payment by results, and governance. Now, I'm not going to cover, because of time, I'm not going to cover finances and funding here. If you want to know how to make shed loads of money on Bitcoin, you're going to have to read the book. That's coming. But I will cover some examples of service delivery and alternative governance as we go along. So let's start with use cases that give us some really interesting prototypes for new kinds of service delivery. Alice, very, very cool example. Alice was inaugurated by St. Mungo's Broadway. Now, Alice is essentially a platform. Very simple. You go onto this platform, you see lots of campaigns and projects that you can donate to. Each of these projects have milestones. And what happens is, if the particular project reaches the milestone, the donation goes through. If it doesn't, you get the money back. Now, the amount of detail that is generated for the donor in real time is possible as a result of the fact that this is all stored on the blockchain. Let me explain what I mean by that. So this isn't very clear, but if you can see, this is a typical Alice readout, and it's very kind of millennial. There's lots of sort of graphs and readouts and all the rest of it. You can see that there are some goals towards the side there. So sort of finding a temporary home, finding a permanent home for this particular project, keeping a permanent home, registering with a GP. These are all goals that people will pay out on receipt of. And the reason that they can do this is because all of this data is stored on the blockchain. When all of this stuff happens, the donor is told in real time that it has happened, and they know that the project is coming to some sort of fruition. So it's a really interesting system. It's a really interesting way of forming a connection between donor and charity. It is a kind of payments by results system, albeit a sort of payments by results system on steroids. And so there are certain challenges associated with that, and we'll talk about those presently. But Alice is a really interesting example, really interesting use case. Disperse. So disperse is another interesting use case. This seeks to deal with the problem in international aid that Kate mentioned earlier, and that is when you try and transfer money or goods internationally, there are lots of links in the chain, and at every single one of those links, there can be inefficiencies, there can be corruption, there can be middlemen taking their cut, there can be all sorts of problems. What Disperse does is it transfers that chain to the blockchain. So effectively, what's happening here, and there's a diagram here. What tends to happen is that Disperse involves a large charity working with a charity in a different country on the ground. And there'll be sort of suppliers who are kind of giving out, I don't know, rice or food or money or whatever. And there's all these different relationships. If you put all these relationships on the blockchain, there's that much more transparency. There's much less chance of inefficiencies and bureaucracies reducing the amount of money that comes out at one end. And through the technology made possible by it all being on the blockchain, by it being monetized. The framework that they use, by the way, is something called Ethereum. If you want to know what that is, I'm not going to talk about that now, but I'm happy to talk about it after this. But through the magic, if you like, of the blockchain, this means that there's far less waste than there otherwise would be. So these use cases, I think, they sort of demonstrate some of the potential here. Ultimately, this is kind of about trust, trust in international aid. Alice, they very much describe themselves as being about trust in charities, about forming a connection based upon results, based upon outcomes between the donor and the donated and the cause. But there are obviously difficulties with this kind of model, and these difficulties are ones that we often associate with payment by results, with PBR. In every social case, it's not possible to define a satisfactory outcome. In this case, that applies doubly. Outcomes that are worth pursuing this year might not be worth pursuing further down the line. So there's a question about long-term sustainability of simply pursuing goals. And then there's the big question, the kind of political question, which we haven't really got an answer for, which is that what all of these projects are about is fundamentally giving the donor more power, more of a say in how their funds are dispersed, how their funds are disseminated, how their funds are spent. And that is a kind of power shift that seems on the face of it to technologists and to many people seems eminently reasonable. But of course we know it's not always the case that donors know best. It's not always the case that the donor in their office or whatever knows what's best for the beneficiary on the other side of the world. And yet this is the apprehension under which the technologists of today are labouring. There is no countervailing advocacy from the charitable sector that suggests there might be something else that we need to be focusing our attention on. And that, I think, is a problem and a challenge that we need to face up to right now, because this conversation isn't really happening right now. How am I doing for time? I'm all right. Okay, I'm going to talk then very quickly about governance. There are two things I really want to say about governance. There are kind of two ideas that I want to leave you with. One is a kind of easy idea, and one is a bit weirder and a bit more complicated, but hopefully it'll go off all right. So the easy idea is that blockchain involves lots of people coming together to transfer value. There needs to be accountability. So alongside the development in blockchain technology and all the money that's thrown at it, there have been these incredible experiments in accountability, in transparency, in governance that have gone on at the same time. Some really interesting ways of getting decisions through, of making sure that, that what can be automated, and all the rest of it. So, I think these experiments, for people who are interested, for people like me, sad people who are interested in charity governance and think that charity governance could be modernized, I think there is something in this space that we can learn from. Again, these are things that we're going to talk about in the project, but I think there are some really interesting models out there about automating governance and charity governance and governance more generally that we could learn from. That brings us to the slightly more kind of weird and slightly more complicated idea, and I'm going to try and explain this with reference to a case study that's not from the charitable sector. Don't worry about this. This looks complicated, but it all will become clear. So what's been found to be possible over the last couple of years is that people can come together on the blockchain and they can put projects into effect without actually having to have anything other than the blockchain acting as a kind of guiding mechanism, as a governance. So this, for example, is the structure of something called the DAO, which was a kind of venture fund for funding technological projects. And what happened was people would come together, they would suggest projects, number one, in the proposal stage, that need to be, that they thought would be good. They would have a vote on them, so there'd be some kind of governance structure. The projects would be developed and they'd be deployed. And this all happened within the integument of the blockchain itself. There was no external agency, no company. This was a venture fund that existed without a company structure guiding it. It all happened on the blockchain through something called smart contracts. This is kind of one of the guiding sort of themes, the leitmotifs of blockchain technology. You probably heard the word disintermediation today. And what that really means is, so you have Bitcoin, which is a currency without a central bank. You have the DAO, which is kind of a venture fund without a company. And what people who are working, and this is going to be slightly scary, but what people who are working on blockchain technology right now are wondering when it comes to philanthropy is, could we have philanthropy without charities? Would it be possible to have a situation in which philanthropy was capable of being done by individual groups of donors coming together on the blockchain, governing themselves, using these accountability processes? Would it be possible to have such a thing as a post-charity world? It's quite a scary prospect. But it's actually, there are people who are actually trying to make this happen. So there's this organization called Giveth. They build what are called decentralized altruistic communities, or DACs. They're just DAOs, but charity versions. And it's a bit like Alice, but it's actually people coming. It's not a charity that's creating these campaigns. It's people coming together and deciding what they want to be funded, taking information from what's already out there, from open source repositories that are on the blockchain. That are out there on the internet, things like GitHub or CharityDAO. These are places where this information is stored, and literally making their own charitable action happen together. It's talked about as being conducted in the spirit of democratic ownership, but again, there are serious challenges with this. And I think, as we unpick this technology a little bit more, I think we have to recognise that there are some serious questions, and that's some of the things that we want to talk about here. That's Giveth in practice. So the challenges, to wrap up. Do we really want a world of decharitized philanthropy? I suspect the answer to that question is no. Thank you, Stephen. And if the answer to that question is no, then we need to get our butts in gear, because this is happening right now. People are making this happen right now. We need to engage with this technology and understand this technology and guide the weapons-grade technologists that are driving it, and guide the billionaire venture capitalists that are driving it as well, and help them understand what we need as activists if we're going to be able to help the people that we want to help. Because right now that conversation is not happening. I'm just going to finish with one slide, and then I promise I'll leave you to your devices. The first thing is more reasons to get engaged in this. One is governments are already switching their systems and trying to experiment with blockchain so that their service delivery and their ecosystems, especially in health, are kind of on the blockchain. Dubai, they aim to get their health services and health systems on the blockchain by 2021, at the latest 2019, ideally. Other governments will follow. The second thing is, as charity people, you are already losing money to new entrants into the marketplace who understand blockchain. I've recently encountered an organization that is trying to raise money for its own coin offering, a bit like Bitcoin, and it's using charity as a kind of shield to kind of raise more money and drum up interest in what it's doing. That money, people are giving to it, donors are giving to it, thinking that it's charitable, but actually, you know, a lot of that value will go to line the pockets of their shareholders, not the people that you're trying to help. So, you know, we really need to engage with these organizations, confront them where they're not doing what we need them to do, and really, you know, take our place in this space. There are lots of free resources out there. I think one of the things that I'd like to do is to try and help the community understand what those are and make best use of them, spread the proceeds of growth. We do need a brightest and best group to bring all this stuff together, bring developers together, bring government officials together, bring people from the sector who understand this stuff. Our advocates, the advocates that we currently have, they're not capable of having this conversation at this point in time. The human resources aren't there. The understanding of technology isn't there. We are going to need some kind of new group, and maybe that's something that Charity Futures could have a look at, that is capable of having that conversation, because the usual suspects, they ain't going to do it. And that brings us to the final thing, which I've kind of put in quite florid language there. But really, the hypertech neoliberal nightmare is where our future, and by that I mean the future of, you know, I mean, what we fundamentally care about is our beneficiaries, the future of common regard, the future of public benefit. The nightmare is when that future is decided by a bunch of egotistical technologists and venture philanthropists. We cannot allow that to happen under any circumstance. And so my plea, and I think the plea of my project and our work with Charity Futures, is going to be to come together, to take collective ownership of this conversation, to apply, you know, our collective voice to this, and to apply the moral right and intellectual velocity that has always been part of the way that we've ensured the good of our beneficiaries. And I think going forward, that's the way we're going to ensure our charities' futures as well. Thanks.